14-year-old girl full of life and dreams was stabbed to death by her best friend. It sounds like something out of a tragic novel, but for Nyla Lightfoot's family, this was no fiction. Her loss left a wound so deep that even time can't heal it. What could drive a 13-year-old to such a horrific act? How does a friendship built on trust and shared dreams end in violence? And most haunting of all, could this tragedy have been stopped? Today we unravel the heartbreaking story of Nyla Lightfoot, a story of friendship turned fatal, of warning signs overlooked, and of lives forever changed. As we tell her story, we'll explore not just what happened, but why, and what lessons can be learned to ensure such a tragedy never happens again. Nyla's story begins in her family's apartment complex on the south side of Fort Worth, Texas. She was surrounded by family, friends, and a community that adored her. But one night, a simple argument turned into an unimaginable tragedy. Two girls, both so young, caught in a moment of uncontrolled anger that would change their lives forever. One of them would never come home. The other would find herself at the center of a courtroom, facing a future no one could have predicted. At just 14 years old, Nyla Lightfoot was on the cusp of so much potential. She was a kind-hearted, bright young girl who excelled at school and loved spending time with her family and friends. But her life was cut short, leaving behind questions that still echo. Why did this happen? Could someone have seen the signs and stopped it before it was too late? Her best friend, just 13 years old, is now known not for their bond but for taking her life. A girl with a history of anger and instability. A girl whose struggles may have gone unnoticed until it was far too late. This isn't just a story about what happened that night. It's a story about missed chances, overlooked warnings, and a community left to pick up the pieces. As we delve deeper into this tragedy, we're left to ask ourselves, are we doing enough to protect the children in our lives? It was a warm May evening in Fort Worth, Texas. The kind of night where the air hums with the quiet routines of life. Children playing, families winding down, neighbors chatting on balconies. But in one apartment complex, this calm would be shattered by a series of events no one could have foreseen. For Nyla Lightfoot, it began as an ordinary disagreement between two friends. By morning, it had escalated into a tragedy that would leave a permanent scar on everyone involved. At the heart of this tragedy was a conflict between Nyla and her best friend. A conflict that seemed, at first, like any other. But anger has a way of festering, and when words failed, actions took over. As the argument unfolded, emotions boiled over. And then, in an instant, it became something far darker. A moment of uncontrolled rage that no one could undo. Neighbors reported hearing raised voices, a heated exchange echoing through the quiet night. Moments later, silence fell, and in that silence, a life was lost. Nyla lay on the ground, bleeding from stab wounds to her chest and neck. The friend she had trusted, someone she had shared her life with, was gone, having fled the scene. When first responders arrived, they found Nyla in critical condition. She was rushed to the hospital, where doctors worked tirelessly to save her, but the injuries were too severe. Nyla, just 14 years old, was pronounced dead, leaving behind a family and community struggling to comprehend what had just happened. The suspect, a 13-year-old girl, was nowhere to be found. Her absence only added to the confusion and disbelief. How had a bond as close as theirs turned into something so catastrophic? And how could someone so young commit an act so violent? When young people face conflict, are we equipping them with the tools to manage their emotions before they reach a breaking point? And when the signs of instability appear, are we paying attention, or are we looking the other way? This wasn't just a story about one moment of rage. It was a series of unchecked emotions, missed warning signs, and a fragile friendship pushed past its breaking point. The events of that night were devastating, but they also raised critical questions. How do we prevent conflict from spiraling into tragedy? And are we truly listening to the silent cries for help from those who need it most? To understand this tragedy, we must look closer at the lives of these two young girls. Nyla Lightfoot, a beacon of kindness and potential, and her best friend, whose struggles led to this unimaginable act. Before we delve deeper into this tragedy, let's take a moment to remember who Nyla Lightfoot was, a girl far more than the circumstances of her death. It's easy to focus on the end of her story, but to truly understand the loss, we must first celebrate the life she lived. A life filled with hope, kindness, and promise. At 14 years old, Nyla was already a standout in her community. Her teachers described her as bright, curious, and full of potential. She excelled academically, consistently earning top grades in her classes. Beyond the classroom, she was a natural leader, someone her peers looked up to and respected. Nyla often spoke about her dreams for the future. She wanted to make a difference in the world, whether through her academic pursuits, her involvement in community activities, or simply by being a beacon of kindness to those around her. She had the kind of drive and ambition that promised a bright future. Nyla's talents extended far beyond her schoolwork. She was an active participant in her school's choir, where her voice stood out as both powerful and heartfelt. Music was her outlet, a way for her to express the joy and creativity she carried within. She was also a member of her school's soccer team. While she wasn't the star player, her dedication and team spirit were unmatched. Teammates recall her cheering them on, lifting their spirits even during the toughest games. But what truly set Nyla apart was her heart. She was known for her kindness, her empathy, and her ability to make anyone feel seen and valued. Her friends described her as the person they could always turn to no matter what. She had a way of bringing people together, of finding the good in everyone she met. Her mother, Antoinette Carter, often spoke about the light Nyla brought into their home. She had this way of making every day feel special, her mother said, her voice heavy with emotion. Even when things were tough, Nyla would find a way to make us laugh, to remind us of what really mattered. Her teachers recalled her eagerness to learn and her willingness to help others. If another student was struggling, Nyla was the first to step in, one teacher shared. She had this way of lifting others up while still challenging herself to be better. Her best friends remember her as the glue that held their group together. "She was always there for us," one friend said tearfully. "She made us feel like we mattered, like we were family." As we reflect on Nyla's life, it's clear that she left an indelible mark on everyone she met. Her kindness, her laughter, and her determination to uplift those around her remain her lasting legacy. But now, I ask you, what would you want the world to remember about you? What would your legacy be? Nyla's story reminds us of the beauty and potential in every young life. Are we doing enough to nurture and protect that potential? Not just in those we know and love, but in every child in our communities. In celebrating Nyla's life, we also recognize the magnitude of her loss. A young girl with so much promise, whose future was stolen far too soon. As her family and friends hold on to the memories she left behind, we're left with one undeniable truth. Nyla Lightfoot mattered, and her story deserves to be told. As we move forward, let us carry the lessons of her life with us. Let us honor her legacy by fostering kindness, empathy, and hope in every child we encounter. The other side of this tragedy lies in the story of the 13-year-old girl who committed this unthinkable act, a girl battling her own demons. While Nyla Lightfoot's life was tragically taken, the young girl who took it carried a burden of her own, one that perhaps went unnoticed for far too long. What could drive someone so young to commit such a violent act? And could this tragedy have been prevented? The suspect's life was marked by instability and conflict from an early age. Her family had moved multiple times across state lines, each relocation spurred by behavioral issues that had escalated beyond control. Her parents, struggling to manage her outbursts, sought fresh starts in new communities. But the anger followed, growing stronger and more unmanageable. Neighbors and teachers had seen glimpses of her struggles, frequent arguments, outbursts at school, and an inability to control her temper. On several occasions, her anger led to fights with classmates, resulting in disciplinary action. But the underlying issues were never fully addressed. Family members later revealed that the suspect's behavior had been a source of concern for years. She had difficulty forming stable friendships, often falling into patterns of conflict and isolation. Despite these warning signs, there were no consistent efforts to provide her with mental health support or counseling. Psychologists describe this type of unchecked anger as a ticking time bomb, an emotional storm building beneath the surface. Without proper guidance or intervention, small frustrations can escalate into catastrophic actions. And for the suspect, it seems this storm finally reached its breaking point on that fateful night. This tragedy forces us to confront difficult questions about the systems meant to protect and support young people. Were the warning signs ignored? Could early intervention have redirected her path? And how do we ensure that children grappling with emotional challenges receive the help they so desperately need? Experts argue that behavior like hers often stems from a combination of factors: unresolved trauma, a lack of emotional regulation skills, and an absence of consistent support. Without intervention, anger can become the lens through which a child views the world, a lens that distorts every slight into a personal attack, every argument into a battle. Psychologists who study juvenile behavior warn that anger in children is rarely just anger. It's often a symptom of deeper pain, unresolved grief, unmet needs, or a desperate cry for attention. But without the right tools or resources, families can find themselves overwhelmed, unsure of how to help. In the suspect's case, her family may have tried their best, but their efforts were scattered, inconsistent, and ultimately ineffective. This isn't just a story about one girl's actions. It's a story about a system that failed her long before she reached that breaking point. How can we better identify and support children struggling with emotional challenges? Are we doing enough to ensure that no young person slips through the cracks of a system meant to protect them? As we examine the suspect's history, it becomes clear that this tragedy wasn't inevitable. There were moments where intervention could have changed her path, where consistent support could have diffused the anger building inside her. But these moments came and went, unnoticed or unaddressed, and in the end, 2 lives were irreversibly altered. To prevent future tragedies, we must learn from this one. We must ask hard questions, challenge systemic failures, and ensure that no child's struggles go unnoticed. Only then can we hope to build a safer, more supportive world for all young people. The trial of a 13-year-old girl accused of taking the life of her best friend was not just a legal proceeding. It was an emotional battlefield. The courtroom, heavy with the weight of grief and anger, became the stage for a community's quest for justice, a family's heartbreaking testimony, and a legal system grappling with one of its most difficult challenges: how to balance punishment and rehabilitation for someone so young. The trial began with a somber atmosphere. Neela's family sat together, clutching tissues and holding back tears as they faced the girl who had taken their loved one. On the other side of the courtroom sat the suspect's family, silent and visibly shaken, grappling with the reality of the situation. Between them was a divide that no amount of words could bridge. The suspect, now 14 years old, sat in a juvenile courtroom. Dressed simply, she looked far younger than her actions suggested. Her hands trembled slightly as she listened to the charges read against her. First-degree murder. The most heart-wrenching moments came during the testimonies from Nyla's family. Her mother, Antoinette Carter, took the stand, her voice trembling with emotion. Her words resonated through the courtroom, leaving many in tears. It was a raw, unfiltered expression of a mother's unimaginable grief. Other family members and friends also shared memories of Nyla, describing her as a bright, kind, and loving young girl. Each story painted a picture of a life full of promise, now reduced to memories. The defense team painted a picture of a troubled young girl who acted out of uncontrolled rage, not premeditation. They emphasized her history of behavioral issues, arguing that she needed help, not just punishment. The prosecution, however, focused on the gravity of the crime and the loss suffered by Nyla's family. They argued that the suspect's history of anger issues and the nature of the attack demanded a significant sentence. After days of emotional testimonies and legal arguments, the judge delivered the verdict. The suspect was sentenced to 25 years in juvenile custody, with the possibility of transfer to an adult facility after age 19. It was the maximum sentence allowed under the circumstances. Outside the courtroom, the community grappled with mixed emotions. Some felt the sentence was too lenient given the gravity of the crime. Others questioned the fairness of incarcerating someone so young for decades. Vigils continued to be held in Nyla's honor, with residents calling for increased support for troubled youth. It was a stark reminder that while the legal process had concluded, the work of healing and prevention had only just begun. When a child commits such a violent act, how do we as a society respond? Is punishment enough? Or should we focus more on rehabilitation and understanding the root causes of their behavior? The trial may have ended, but the questions it raised remain. How do we prevent such tragedies from occurring again? How do we support families on both sides of the courtroom? And how do we ensure that justice and compassion coexist in cases as complex as this? For Nyla's family, the sentence brought some measure of justice, but it could never truly heal the wound left by her loss. For the suspect's family, it was a devastating reminder of the consequences of one fateful night. Nyla's death wasn't just a loss for her family, it was a wound for her entire community. The pain rippled far beyond her home, touching neighbors, classmates, and strangers who saw their own children in her story. But in the face of such heartbreak, the community came together, determined to honor Nyla's memory and ensure her death was not in vain. In the days following her death, candlelit vigils were held across Fort Worth. Friends, family, and even strangers gathered to remember Nyla, a young girl whose life was taken far too soon. The air was heavy with grief, but there was also a palpable sense of unity. People shared stories, lit candles, and vowed to make a difference in her name. Patricia Allen, founder of the organization No More Violence, played a key role in organizing the vigils. "This is about more than just one family's pain," she said. "It's about addressing the violence in our communities and making sure no other family has to go through this." The support extended beyond vigils. Organizations like No More Violence stepped in to provide emotional and logistical help for Nyla's family, offering meals, counseling, and community resources. Churches and local leaders also came together, creating a network of support that reminded the Lightfoot family they were not alone in their grief. Nyla's death also prompted change within her school and the wider district. Educators and administrators moved by the tragedy implemented new programs to address the emotional and social challenges faced by students. Anti-bullying campaigns were launched, emphasizing empathy and communication as tools to resolve conflicts. Mental health resources were also expanded. Counselors visited classrooms to talk about anger management and emotional regulation, while workshops for parents provided guidance on identifying and addressing behavioral warning signs in their children. Moore's initiatives were about more than just honoring Nyla's memory. They were about creating a safer, more supportive environment for all students, a way to ensure that no child felt so alone or angry that they resorted to violence. For many in the community, Nyla's death was a wake-up call. It forced them to confront difficult truths about the challenges young people face. Pressures at home, conflicts with friends, and the struggle to manage emotions in a world that often feels overwhelming. Local leaders like Reverend Kevin Tatum emphasized the importance of kindness and communication. "We need to build bridges, not walls," he said at one gathering. "We need to teach our kids that there's always a better way." Why did tragedy strikes? How do we channel our grief into action? Are we doing enough in our communities to teach kindness, empathy, and conflict resolution? And what more can we do to ensure that no child's life is cut short by violence? The community's response to Nyla's death was both heartbreaking and inspiring. It showed the power of unity, the importance of support, and the potential for change when people come together with a common purpose. But it also served as a reminder that the work is far from over. Nyla's life was a bright light, extinguished too soon. In her memory, the community vowed to build a world where such tragedies would never happen again. A world where every child feels seen, supported, and valued. Nyla's death left a void, but her legacy lives on in the hearts of those who knew her and the actions of a community determined to make a difference. This tragedy forces us to confront difficult questions about the systems meant to protect and support young people. Were the warning signs ignored? Could early intervention have redirected her path? And how do we ensure that children grappling with emotional challenges receive the help they so desperately need? Experts agree that early intervention is critical when addressing behavioral issues in children. Psychologists emphasize that what we often dismiss as just a phase can be the early signs of deeper emotional struggles. These signs, if ignored, can escalate into patterns of anger, isolation, and in extreme cases, violence. Studies show that children who receive emotional support and conflict resolution training are far less likely to engage in violent behavior. Programs that teach empathy, anger management, and healthy communication can be life-changing, not just for the child but for their families and communities. Schools play a pivotal role in shaping the emotional and social development of children. Anti-bullying campaigns, peer mediation programs, and increased access to school counselors can make a significant difference in preventing conflicts from escalating. Communities, too, have a responsibility to foster environments where children feel supported and valued. After-school programs, mentorship opportunities, and accessible mental health services can provide the guidance and stability that at-risk children often lack. Psychologists and juvenile justice experts highlight the importance of a multidisciplinary approach. They argue that families, schools, and communities must work together to identify and address warning signs early. This requires not just awareness, but also access to resources and the willingness to intervene. Nyla's story is a heartbreaking reminder of what happens when anger and conflict go unaddressed. But it's also a call to action, a chance for all of us to reflect on how we can create a safer, more supportive world for our children. It starts with listening to our children, to our neighbors, to the professionals who dedicate their lives to helping those in need. It requires collaboration, compassion, and a commitment to addressing the root causes of violence before they escalate. What role can you play in supporting the young people in your life? How can we as a society work together to ensure every child feels seen, valued, and supported? The lessons from this tragedy are clear. We must act, and we must act together. We owe it to Nyla, to her family, and to every child whose future depends on our ability to create a world where they can thrive without fear. The time for change is now, and it begins with each of us, doing our part to build a better future for the next generation. Nyla Lightfoot's story is one of tragedy, but it is also one of love, resilience, and hope. Her memory calls on us to do better, to protect, support, and uplift the lives of every child. Though her life was cut short, her light continues to shine through those who loved her, and those inspired by her story. Nyla was more than just a victim of a tragic event. She was a daughter, a friend, a dreamer, and a source of joy for everyone around her. Her kindness, her laughter, and her aspirations to make the world a better place will never be forgotten. Her story reminds us of the fragility of life, but it also inspires us to take action, to ensure that no other family has to endure the heartbreak her family faces every day. Let us honor Nyla's legacy by taking action. Support anti-violence programs in your community. Advocate for better mental health resources in schools and neighborhoods. Reach out to the children in your life and remind them that they are seen, heard, and valued. And, most importantly, be the light in someone's life. Together we can build a safer, kinder world, one where every child has the chance to thrive, and no life is lost to senseless violence. Thank you for remembering Nyla Lightfoot with us today. Let's honor her by building a safer, kinder world for all children. And don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more stories that inspire change. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.